Part 5. Through the Gates of Gold, Chapter 27. Welcome on our return. A magic mirror work in the cities of earth, the land of remorse, the valley of phantom mists, a home of rest on our return to the land of dawn. We met with a right royal welcome from our brotherhood, and a festival was given in our honor. On entering our own little rooms, each of us found a new robe awaiting him. It was of a very light gray, almost white color, and the border, girdle, and device of our order, an anchor and a star upon the left sleeve, were in deep golden yellow. I greatly prized this new dress, because in the spirit world the dress symbolizes a state of advancement of the spirit, and is esteemed as showing what each one has attained. What I prized even more than this new dress, however, was a most beautiful wreath of pure white spirit roses which I found had clustered around and framed the magic picture of my beloved, a frame that never withered, never faded, and whose fragrance was wafted to me as I reposed on the snow-white couch and gazed out upon those peaceful hills behind which there shone the dawning day. I was aroused from my reverie by a friend who came to summon me to the festival, and on entering the great hall I found my father and some friends of my wanderings awaiting me. We greeted one another with much emotion, and after we had enjoyed a banquet similar to the one I have described on my first entrance to this sphere, we all assembled at the lower end of the hall before a large curtain of gray and gold which completely covered the walls. While we waited in expectation of what we were to see, a soft strain of music floated towards us as though borne upon some passing breeze. This grew stronger, fuller, more distinct, till a solemn majestic measure like the march of an army fell upon our ears. Not a march of triumph or rejoicing, but one such as might be played by an army of giants mourning over a dead comrade, so grand, so full of pathos was this strain. Then the curtains glided apart and showed us a huge mirror of black polished marble. And then the music changed to another measure, still solemn, still grand, but with somewhat of discordance in its tones. It wavered too and became uneven in the measure of its time, as though halting with uncertain step, stumbling and hesitating. Then the air around us darkened till we could scarce see each other's faces. Slowly the light faded, and at last all we could see was the black polished surface of the gigantic mirror, and in it I saw reflected the figures of two of the members of our expedition. They moved and spoke, and the scenery around them grew distinct and such as I had seen in the inferno we had left. The weird music stirred my soul to its inmost core, and looking upon the drama being enacted before my eyes, I forgot where I was. I forgot everything, and seemed to be wandering once more in the dark depths of hell. Picture melted into picture, till we had been shown the varied experiences of each of our band, from the lowest member to our leader himself, the last scene showing the whole company assembled upon the hill listening to the farewell discourse of our commander. And like the chorus in a Greek tragedy, the wild music seemed to accompany and explain it all, varying with every variation in the dramas, now sad and sorrowful, now full of repose or triumph, and again wailing, sobbing, shrieking, or changing into a murmuring lullaby as some poor rescued soul sank to rest at last, then again rising into wild notes of clamor, fierce cries of battle, hoarse curses and imprecations, now surging in wild waves of tumultuous melody, then dying away amidst discordant broken notes. At last, as the final scene was enacted, it sank into a soft plaintive air of most exquisite sweetness, and died away note by note. As it ceased, the darkness vanished, the curtains glided over the black mirror, and we all turned with a sigh of relief and thankfulness to congratulate each other that our wanderings in that dark land were past. I asked my father how this effect had been produced. Was it an illusion or what? "My son," he answered, "what you have seen is an application of scientific knowledge, nothing more. This mirror has been so prepared that it receives and reflects the images thrown upon it from a series of sheets of thin metal, or rather what is a spiritual counterpart of earthly metal. These sheets of metal have been so highly sensitized that they are able to receive and retain these pictures somewhat in the fashion of a phonograph, such as you saw in Earth. Life receives and retains the sound waves. When you were wandering in those dark spheres, you were put in magnetic communication with this instrument, and the adventures of each were transferred to one of these sensitive sheets, while the emotions of every one of you caused the sound waves in the spheres of music and literature to vibrate in corresponding tones of sympathy. You belong to the spheres of art, music and literature, and therefore you are able to see and feel and understand the vibrations of those spheres. In the spirit world, all emotions, speeches, or events reproduce themselves in objective forms and become for those in harmony with them either pictures, melodies, or spoken narratives. The spirit world is created by the thoughts and actions of the soul, and therefore every act or thought forms its spiritually material counterpart. In this sphere you will find many things not yet known to men on earth, many curious inventions which will in time be transmitted to earth and clothed there in material form. But see, you are about to receive the palm branch which is given to each of you as a reward of your victory. At this moment the large doors of the hall were once more thrown open, and our Grand Master entered, followed by the same train of handsome youths I had seen before. Only this time each carried a branch of palm instead of a wreath of laurel. When the Grand Master had seated himself under his canopy of state, we were each summoned to his presence to receive our branch of palm. And when we had all done so and returned to our places again, a most joyous hymn of victory was sung by everyone, our palm branches waving in time to the music, and our glad voices filling the air with triumphant harmony. I now enjoyed a long quiet season of rest, which much resembled that half-waking, half-sleeping state, when the mind is too much in repose to think and yet retains full consciousness of all its surroundings. From this state, which lasted some weeks, I arose completely recovered from the effects of my wanderings in the dark spheres. And my first thought was to visit my beloved, and see if she could see me and be conscious of my improved appearance. I shall not, however, dwell upon our interview. Its joy was for ourselves alone. I only seek to show that death does not of necessity either end our affection for those we have left or shut us out from sharing with them our joys or sorrows. I found that I was now much more able to communicate with her through her own mediumistic powers, so that we did not need any third person to intervene and help us. And thus were my labors lightened and cheered by her sweet affection and her conscious recognition of my presence and of my continued existence. My work at this time was once more upon the earth plane and in those cities whose counterparts I had seen in hell. I had to labor among those mortals and spirits who thronged them, and impress their minds with a sense of what I had seen in that dark sphere far below. I knew I could only make them dimly conscious of it, only arouse a little their dormant sense of fear of future retribution for their present misdeeds. But even that was something, and would help to deter some from a too complete abandonment of themselves to selfish pleasure. Moreover, amongst the spirits who were earthbound to those cities I found many whom I could assist, with the knowledge and strength which I had gained in my journey. There ever is and ever must be ample work for those who work upon the earth plane, for multitudinous as are the workers there, more are always being wanted. Since men are passing over from earth life every hour and every minute, who need all the help that can be given them. Thus passed some months for me, and then I began once more to feel the old restless longing to rise higher myself, to attain more than I had yet done, to approach nearer to that sphere to which my beloved one would pass when her earthly life was ended, and by attaining which I could alone hope to be united to her in the spirit world. I used to at this time be tormented with a constant fear lest my darling should pass from earth before I had risen to her spiritual level, and thus I should again be parted from her. This fear it was which had ever urged me on to fresh efforts, fresh conquests over myself, and now made me dissatisfied even with the progress I had made. I knew that I had overcome much, I had struggled hard to improve, and I had risen wonderfully fast. Yet in spite of all I was still tormented by the jealous and suspicious feelings which my disposition and my earthly experience had gathered about me. There were even times when I would begin to doubt the constancy of my beloved herself. In spite of all the many proofs of her love which she had given me, I would fear lest while I was away from her someone yet in the flesh should after all win her love from me. And thus I was in danger of becoming earthbound by reason of my unworthy desire to watch her continually. Ah, you who think a spirit has changed all his thoughts and desires at the moment of dissolution, how little you understand of the conditions of that other life beyond the grave, and how very slowly we change the habits of thought we have cultivated in our earthly lives, or how long they cling to us in this spiritual state. I was then in character much what I had been on earth, only a little better, only learning by degrees wherein my ideas had been wrong and full of prejudice. a lesson we may go on learning through many spheres, higher than any I had attained to. Even while I doubted and feared, I was ashamed of my doubts and knew how unjust they were, yet could I not free myself from them. The experiences of my earth life had taught me suspicion and distrust, and the ghosts of that earth life were not so easily laid. It was while I was in this state of self-torment that our Zeman came to me and told me how I might free myself from these haunting shadows of the past. "There is," said he, "a land not far from here called the Land of Remorse. Were you to visit it, the journey would be of much service to you, for once its hills and valleys were passed and its difficulties overcome, the true nature of your earthly life and its mistakes would be clearly realized and prove a great means of progression for your soul. Such a journey will indeed be full of much bitterness and sorrow, for you will see displayed in all their nakedness the actions of your past. Actions which you have already in part atoned for but do not yet see as the eyes of the higher spiritual intelligences see them. Few who come over from earth life really realize the true motives which prompted their actions. Many indeed go on for years, some even for centuries, before this knowledge comes to them. They excuse and justify to their own consciences their misdeeds, and such a land as this I speak of is very useful for enlightening them. The journey must, however, be undertaken voluntarily, and it will then shorten by years the pathway of progression. In that land men's lives are stored up as pictures which, mirrored in the wondrous spiritual atmosphere, reflect for them the reasons of many failures, and show the subtle causes at work in their own hearts which have shaped the lives of each. It would be a severe and keen self-examination through which you would pass, a bitter experience of your own nature, your own self, but though a bitter it is a salutary medicine, and would go far to heal your soul of those maladies of the earth life which like a miasma hang about it still. "Show me," I answered, "where this land is, and I will go to it." Our Zeman took me to the top of one of those dim and distant hills which I could see from the window of my little room, and leading me to where we looked down across a wide plain bounded by another range of hills far away, said, "On the other side of those farther hills lies this wondrous land of which I speak, a land through which most spirits pass whose lives have been such as to call for great sorrow and remorse. Those whose errors have been merely trivial, daily weaknesses such as are common to all mankind, do not pass through it. There are other means whereby they may be enlightened as to the source of their mistakes. This land is more particularly useful to such as yourself, of strong powers and strong will, who will recognize readily and admit freely wherein you have done wrong, and in doing so arise to better things. Like a strong tonic, this circle of the sphere would be too much for some weak erring spirits who would only be crushed and overwhelmed and disheartened by the too rapid and vivid realization of all their sins. Such spirits must be taught slowly, step by step, a little at a time. While you who are strong of heart and full of courage will but rise the more rapidly the sooner you see and recognize the nature of those fetters which have bound your soul. And will it take me long to accomplish this journey? No. It will last but a short time, 2 or 3 weeks of earth time, for behold, as I shadow it forth to you I see following it fast the image of your returning spirit, showing that the two events are not separated by a wide interval. In the spirit world where time is not reckoned by days or weeks or counted by hours, we judge of how long an event will take to accomplish or when an occurrence will happen by seeing how near or how far away they appear, and also by observing whether the shadow cast by the coming event touches the earth or is yet distant from it. We then try to judge as nearly as possible of what will be its corresponding time as measured by earthly standards. Even the wisest of us may not always be able to do this with perfect correctness. Thus it is as well for those who communicate with friends on earth not to give an exact date for foreseen events, since many things may intervene to delay it and thus make the date incorrect. An event may be shown very near, yet instead of continuing to travel to the mortal at the same speed it may be delayed or held in suspense, and sometimes even turned aside altogether by a stronger power than the one which has set it in motion. I thanked my guide for his advice and we parted. I was so very eager to progress that a very short time after this conversation saw me setting forth upon my new journey. I found my progress not so rapid as had been the case in my previous travels through the spirit land, for now I had taken upon me the full burden of my past sins. and like the load carried by the pilgrim Christian, it almost weighed me down to the earth, making my movements very slow and laborious. Like a pilgrim, I was habited in a coarse grey robe, my feet were bare and my head uncovered, for in the spirit world the condition of your mind forms your clothing and surroundings. And my feelings then were as though I wore sackcloth and had put dust and ashes upon my head. When I had at last crossed those dim far-off hills, there lay before me a wide sandy plain, a great desert, in which I saw the barren sands of my earthly life lie scattered. No tree, no shrub, no green thing was there anywhere for the eye to rest upon, no water of refreshment to sparkle before us like hopes of happiness. There was no shade for our weary limbs should we seek for repose. The lives of those who crossed this plain in search of the rest beyond had been barren of true, pure, unselfish affection, and that self-denial which alone can make the desert to blossom like the rose and sweet waters of refreshment to spring up around their paths. I descended to this dreary waste of sand, and took a narrow path which seemed to lead to the hills on the other side. The load I carried had now become almost intolerable to me, and I longed to lay it down, but in vain. I could not for one moment detach it. The hot sand seemed to blister my feet as I walked, and each step was so labored as to be most painful. As I passed slowly on, there rose before me pictures of my past, and of all those whom I had known. These pictures seemed to be just in front of me and to float in the atmosphere like those mirages seen by earthly travelers through the desert. Like dissolving views, they appeared to melt into one another and give place to fresh scenes. Through them all there moved the friends or strangers whom I had met and known. And the long-forgotten unkind thoughts and words which I had spoken to them rose up in an accusing array before me, the tears I had made others shed, the cruel words sharper and harder to bear than any blow with which I had wounded the feelings of those around me. 1,000 hard unworthy thoughts and selfish actions of my past, long thrust aside and forgotten or excused, all rose up once more before me, picture after picture, till at last I was so overwhelmed to see what an array of them there was, that I broke down. And casting my pride to the winds, I bowed myself in the dust, and wept bitter tears of shame and sorrow. And where my tears fell on the hot dry sand, there sprang up around me little flowers like white stars, each little waxy blossom bearing in its heart a drop of dew, so that the place I had sunk down upon in such sorrow had become a little oasis of beauty in that weary desert. I plucked a few of those tiny blossoms, and placed them in my bosom as a memorial of that spot, and then rose to go on again. To my surprise, the pictures were no longer visible, but in front of me I beheld a woman carrying a little child whose weight seemed too much for her strength, and it was wailing with weariness and fear. I hurried up to them and offered to carry the poor little one, for I was touched by the sight of its poor little frightened face and weary drooping head. The woman stared at me for a moment, and then put the little one in my arms, and as I covered him over with a part of my robe, the poor tired little creature sank into a quiet sleep. The woman told me the child was hers, but she had not felt much affection for it during its life. In fact, said she, I did not want a child at all. I do not care for children, and when this one came I was annoyed and neglected it. Then, as it grew older, and was as I thought then naughty and troublesome, I used to beat it and shut it up in dark rooms, and was otherwise hard and unkind. At last, when it was 5 years old, it died, and then I died not long afterwards of the same fever. Since I came to the spirit world, that child has seemed to haunt me, and at last I was advised to take this journey, carrying him with me since I cannot rid myself of his presence. And do you even yet feel no love for the poor little thing? Well, no, I can't say I have come to love it. Perhaps I never shall really love it as some mothers do. Indeed, I am one of those women who should not be mothers at all. The maternal instinct is, as yet at all events, quite wanting in me. I do not love the child, but I am sorry now that I was not kinder to him, and I can see that what I thought was a sense of duty urging me to bring him up properly and correct his faults was only an excuse for my own temper and the irritation the care of him caused. I can see I have done wrong and why I did so, but I cannot say I have much love for this child. And are you to take him with you through all your journey? I asked, feeling so sorry for the poor little unloved thing that I bent over him and kissed him, my own eyes growing dim as I did so.
For I thought of my beloved on earth. And what a treasure she would have deemed such a child, and how tender she would have been to it. And as I kissed him, he put his little arms around my neck and smiled up at me in a half-asleep way that should have gone straight to the woman's heart. Even as it was, her face relaxed a little, and she said more graciously than she had yet spoken, "I am only to carrying a little farther, I believe, and then he will be taken to a sphere where there are many children like him, whose parents do not care about them, and who are taken care of by spirits who are fond of children."